Okay. So the flip side, I'll go back to this after the lecture, the couple slides that I didn't record here. Overexposed, if something's overexposed, we're losing detail in the highlight areas. If it's underexposed, we're losing detail in the shadow areas. You can see the sky looks great here, and shadow areas, there's just nothing there. Now, if we're to correct this in Photoshop, what do you think is going to happen? Anybody can chime in via the chat if you want. What do you guys think would happen in Photoshop if you were to try to correct the exposure on this image?
You would lose other portions of the image.
You could lose other portions of the image. Yep. Anybody else? What happens when we try to raise an area, a shadow area, where there's like not enough light in Photoshop? What's an artifact that we get? Anybody? So remember, if there's not enough light, what happens is it becomes noisy. So as we raise the exposure, we're just going to get a lot of noise. And if we go back to this image here, this is what we're going to get in the shadow areas. Okay, so the important takeaway from this is that you can't create something from nothing. You always want to ask for higher quality files or create your own when you're working on an image. If you're doing the photograph yourself or the scan or whatever, make sure that that master is a high quality master, because although you can make changes in Photoshop, it's in some ways it's only going to be as good as the master. So make sure that you have as much information as possible. Again, we're trying to hold on to as much information. We're trying to capture as much information as possible. In this week's module, you should see something called Electronic Imaging Concepts Quiz. This credit, but I do think that it's a good learning, a good way to learn some of the tools in Photoshop and to test your knowledge of some of the tools. So you should see that in this week's module. So in terms of units of measure, you guys may have heard this before: PPI, DPI, LPI. These are just units of measure, and they're dependent on what they're tethered to a type of device. So when we talk about PPI, what are we talking about? Feel free to comment in the chat.
Pixels per inch.
Pixels per inch. And what devices produce pixels per inch?
Computers or computer screens.
Computer screens, exactly. HD screens, TV, electronic billboards, anything that's, when we talk about PPI, we're talking about typically light producing devices. So cell phones, mobile, that's PPI. DPI, we're talking about print, although people use them interchangeably, and you'll catch me using them interchangeably, DPI and PPI. But the truest definition of DPI has to do with print. It's dots per inch, not pixels. We also have lines per inch. And then in the scanning world, we talk about SPI, which is samples per inch. So, and basically just a unit of measure is how many picture units an image contains per inch of distance in the horizontal and vertical directions. And it's all dependent on the device. Each unit, they're not interchangeable. Each unit handles picture elements different. What's important to know here is that there is a difference between DPI and PPI. They are not the same. A printer might put down several dots per inch. But that does not equal, it's not a one-to-one comparison, 1 pixel per 1 print dot. You might have several print dots needed in order to print 1 pixel, which is 1 single color. This process is called dithering. In terms of print resolution, that's the number of ink dots printed on an inch of paper. That's DPI. And printers have an optimal or an optimum image resolution. And beyond that, if you keep increasing that, the embedded resolution, it makes no discernible difference on the output quality. So let's say, for example, your printer, you buy it in the store, you look at the specs, and it says it can print at 1600 DPI. That's the maximum that it can print. So if you decide to up-res your Photoshop file to something like 2600 DPI, it's going to make absolutely no difference, because 1600 DPI is the limit in terms of what your device, what that printer is able to print. The other caveat to that is you're increasing your file size when you do that, and that can lead to a lot of problems. So you always want to create your Photoshop documents with the end in mind. And if that is a desktop printer, knowing what the highest quality resolution is for that printer is important. People do make this mistake where they use the printer resolution in DPI as PPI, and they get into trouble. So don't confuse those. They are different. 1440 resolution is a lot of information. You can see the difference here where we have a 13 megabyte image, and we have up-resed it. We've gone from 240 to 1440, and look at how large the file is. It's almost 500 megs. It's a big file. So what resolution should you be using? You'll hear print everything at 300 DPI. That's just really a rule of thumb. It's not specific. It depends on the printer. Some printers, their optimal DPI is 600 or 1200. It really just depends. So there is no set DPI that's going to be the best to use for every device. And also something to consider with DPI is the viewing distance. So for example, if you're working on a billboard, you want to be using something with a lower DPI. And reason being is because you're viewing this so far away. If you were to create a file that was printed this size at 300 DPI, it would be probably too large to even be processed on a Mac Pro. I mean, we're talking about a massive file, and it's totally unnecessary because when you view it from a distance, you're not going to see all of that print information anyway. So I've brought this up before. I'm going to bring it up again. It's super important when you're resizing images. If you're doing this for Project One, the very, very last resort is to turn on resample image. The best thing to do when you have an image and you're thinking about what are its output capabilities, turn off resample and then change the sizes here and see what you can get out of an image. When you click on resample, that's where you start to lose quality, and that's where Photoshop is going to start to interpolate. So it's generally best to change the dimensions and resolutions first, see what you can get out of the image, and then only click on resample as a last resort. So, and you want to resize the image in Photoshop, not in a printer, like not in printer software. Photoshop is just a much more robust has a better engine in terms of resizing files, and it will give you higher image quality. So resampling and interpolation are really interchangeable terms. When you resample something, you're asking Photoshop to invent. And here we have an example of we've taken a file and expanded it. And so when we expand it, we're just like leaving a bunch of holes, and Photoshop has to fill those holes with something. And so how it does this is it makes a guess. And here, if you have two pixels next to each other, it looks at this pixel, and then it says, okay, well, this middle pixel must be a gray. And so it invents these pixels, and that doesn't always provide really good results. So, and it results when you interpolation, resampling, it results in a larger image in terms of resolution. But it has less clarity because you can't produce something from nothing. Here's an image that was expanded, resized to 400%, and you can see when you zoom into it, it just kind of breaks apart in terms of image quality. All right, so that's just a little bit about image sizing and image acquisition. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Yeah, sure.
No.
No? Okay. All right. So I got two demonstrations for you guys tonight. And these should help you with your project one. I just recently did a video yesterday, posted it finally. I had this video done like 2 days ago. And it's you should see it in this week's module. I cannot stress how important it is for you guys to watch this video, because this is going to be your grading is going to be tied into some of the techniques that are used in this video, and that is this right here, image retouching from start to finish. There's going to be two of these videos. One is going to be image retouching, and then there's going to be another one that you're going to see next week on colorization. It's going to be using the same image. But this, I think, is important because it shows a full image retouch from beginning to end, from the raw image to the final product. So definitely, if you haven't seen this video yet, I highly recommend you watch it. Okay, so going back to this week's module, if you would like to follow along, if you go into demonstration retouching tools, that's where you can find this image that we're going to work on. And with this image, let's go ahead and open this up in Photoshop. I have a scenario. You are working with an agency, and the creative director has decided he wants to change this for the client. The client doesn't like the fact that there's a woman in jail. They feel like it sends the wrong signal or whatever, and they decide that they like the bars, but they want to take the woman out of the scene. And let's just say it's cheaper for them to pay you to retouch, which often happens, than send a photographer out there to restage this shoot. So let's look at this image. Before we do anything, let's generate some ideas. How are we going to take this woman out of the image? And, oh, thank you, Julie, for the compliment on the video there. How are we going to take the woman out of this image? And what do you think the greatest challenge is going to be in doing that? So feel free to chat or voice or type it in.
I think the biggest difficulty is going to be the shadows on her face and the shadows like on her neck and across her body.
Those are going to be challenging.
And then the bars, of course.
So yeah, the greatest challenge does involve lighting in this. So what kind of tools would you use to take her out of there? Anyone? I'll give you a hint. They're retouching tools. And they're retouching tools that you guys should be familiar with. This week is all about retouching tools. Who can tell me what are some of the retouching tools in Photoshop?
Can you use the clone stamp?
Clone stamp?
No.
Yeah, clone
Oh,
stamp.
really?
Yeah, clone stamp is a retouching tool.
The spot healing.
Spot healing. What else?
The healing brush, the patch tool.
Patch
Healing
tool,
brush
that's
and
what
the
I'm
patch
thinking.
tool. Yes. So what you'll notice here, if I use the healing brush, I'm going to use the standard. Hey, Julie, I think your microphone is open.
Sorry.
It's okay. Hearing a TV back there. So if I use the healing brush here, I'm going to use my brackets to increase or decrease the size of the brush. And I'm going to find a clean area of the image and then try to clone that. So I'm going to use the healing brush for that, or I'll try, and we'll see what we get. So remember, the spot healing brush takes a sample of everything outside of the brush. So watch what happens when I click on this. Look at how weird that is. Because what it's doing is it's sampling everything outside of this circle, right? And it's creating some weird average. The spot healing brush is not what you want to use for anything like this. Anything with hard lines, anything with high contrast. So for example, architecture, because it just doesn't work very well. If I go like this, I mean, look at how it just kind of messes that up. It's not the right tool for this. The spot healing brush is a great tool when you have a pattern. So for example, you know, the wrinkles in her shirt. This is a repetitive pattern. I can take that out, no problem. If she's got a mole, this mole right here, take that out with the spot healing brush, no problem. So skin, that's a great tool for skin. It's not going to work here. Instead, we'll try the healing brush. Now, the difference between the healing brush and the spot healing brush is, remember, the healing brush or the spot healing brush takes a sample from everything outside, whereas the healing brush, I have to set a target. So if I set the target here and come down here and paint, you'll notice what happens is it gives me a preview. And remember that it's I wish I could point to this in another way, but the target is right here. So as I paint, it's showing me what I'm painting, and I'm painting where those crosshairs are. I'm sampling that area, okay? So if I want to paint something up against this edge, the healing brush is a better tool to use than the spot healing brush. Because what I can do is I can set my target right on the line. So I'll set that as my target. I'll come down here, and you'll notice that it gives me a preview. If I start painting right now, if I click, you see how it's just copying those pixels over. This is very similar to the clone stamp tool. It's almost identical with one key difference. Let's try this again. We'll set the target and we'll come back down here and I'll just line it up first. Once it's aligned, then I can click and look at that. It maintains that line pretty well. It's a little bit off here. But the healing brush is very similar to the clone stamp tool. So let's come down here to the clone stamp tool. That's this. Now the clone stamp tool makes an exact copy. So here, if I click on the clone stamp tool, use that as the target, look at that. It's making an exact copy of those pixels, right? But so think of the healing brush as the clone stamp tool plus the spot healing brush combined. So it copies all of the pixels exactly within the brush, and then outside of the brush, it also blends some of the pixels. Whereas the clone stamp tool does not do that. It just creates an exact copy. So this is with the clone stamp tool. We'll come back here to the healing brush, select the healing brush, and then I'll do the same thing. I'll sample this side and watch what happens. See how, if you can see the top here where it's kind of blending, it's not just copying this, but it's also blending what is around here. It's kind of a subtle difference, but so with this image, I think that what I might try is to find a clean area of the image. The greatest challenge here is going to be the lighting, because of this. What you have back here is not a solid color, it's a gradient. So what I can do, I'll give this a try. I am not quite certain how it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work well, but I'm going to paint in, whoops, I'll select this as my target area. Oh, look at that. I'm still on the healing brush. This is why this is not working well, because it's using these pixels in the background. I don't want to do that. I want to use the spot. I want to use the clone stamp tool for this. So we'll use the clone stamp tool. I don't want to pull any of these existing pixels into this. And I'm probably going to need to change my brush to something a little bit harder. Okay. So I'll select the image and then I can paint in here. And I can take her out that way. Okay. And I can, from here, I can keep working on this and blend this, and that will work for the center, but when I get to the edge here, I'm probably gonna want to take a different sample. So instead of just using this blank space here, what I can do is I'll take a sample of this bar and then paint that in. So that'll give me some room to work when I'm up against this detail area. And so from there, I can just come in here and then just blend that a little bit better. This is where, if I'm not up against the bars in a detail area, I would want to use like a softer brush to create more of a blend. And maybe something even softer than that. So something like that, it would take you a little while, but you can do it that way. And I use this image because there's actually a much easier way of doing this, but this is a great image to show the difference, the main difference between the healing brush, the spot healing brush, and the clone stamp tool. And you kind of have to know these differences, especially when you're working with this project one, because you will be using all three of them. They all have different strengths and weaknesses. But for this image, I would not start with the clone stamp tool. I would look at everything I could do to get me as close to the endpoint as possible without doing this fine tuning detail work. So what I could do here is make a copy of the layer. And I could either do a layer mask or I could float the layer. So what I'll do is I'll try to find a clean part of the image, maybe something like this. And I'll hit Command J, that will float it onto its own layer. I can hold down Command, that changes it to the Move tool, and then I would do something like this. Whoops. I'm moving this 1 pixel at a time, holding down Command. Okay, look at that. So this really gets me in the ballpark. Look at how much time I have saved by just kind of thinking outside of the box. And you'll see that it doesn't line up in certain places here, no problem. We can do Command T, which is transform. And Command T allows me to distort the image, so I can just pull this in a little bit. We'll see how that looks. That lines up pretty well. Okay. And so then from here, you know, I still have to kind of massage this. There's definitely differences in lighting. But from here, I can also create a layer mask. Can I get a thumbs up? Who has used a layer mask? If you should be using layer masks. If not for project 1, you'll definitely need them for project 2, but they are very handy. In the video next week, I'll be walking you guys through layer masks. But here, the layer mask, I can add a layer mask. I go down here to add layer mask, or I can do that in here, layer, layer mask, reveal all, or I can do hide all. We'll do hide all. That fills this layer mask with black. And then from here, we can paint with, what color do we want to paint with to bring this back? We're going to paint in the mask. Anybody want to chime in on the chat?
White.
Exactly. White reveals, black conceals. So we will paint with white and pick out a brush. And look at that. It's letting me paint that back in. So I think that, you know, if I were getting paid to do this image, that's the approach I would take. I would find clean areas that will get me 80% of the way there, and then use the clone stamp, healing brush, and I probably wouldn't use spot healing brush for anything in this image, maybe. And that will save me quite a bit of time. So any questions about this image? Anybody? So regardless of what I do, I can keep creating more plates, which is what this would be, a plate. In visual effects world, that's what it would be called. So I would take more clean areas, but regardless, at some point, I would have to do some more blending work to get this all to look good. All right. So you should also see in this week's module demonstration, a second demonstration. And this is, I want to show you this so that you guys are comfortable with using the eyedropper tool and modes. So if you have this open, just go ahead and copy it to your desktop and go ahead and open it in Photoshop. So this image of Abraham Lincoln is something that I got from the archives, the Library of Congress, I believe. I got a raw image. It was really nasty, and I was able to do a retouch colorization. But for this demonstration, I wanted to show you guys this file. It's a good file to practice with. So what we'll do here is we'll do a retouch, and I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to be retouching on that layer. Okay, you always, before you do anything, you want to create a copy of the background just as a backup. And so now I'm going some of the stuff here, and I can use the clone stamp tool, or I can use healing brush, and depending on what you're trying to take out will define what tool you use. So I'm not going to go over all of this here because I go into this in detail in the video, but I do want to show you where you would want to, for most of the video, I think I was using the spot healing brush because, again, remember, it's taking samples of everything around and just kind of averaging it. But there are situations where it's better to use the healing brush. So for example,
You're muted.
Yeah, Professor, I think you're muted.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Also, would you use content aware fill?
Would I use content aware fill?
Yes.
Yes. I would say I probably use that 90% of the time. If I was doing something like grass, a repetitive texture, maybe I would use create texture or proximity match. But feel free to play around with them. There's no one tool and there's no one setting that works in every situation. And quite often there's 5 or 6 different approaches or tools that you can use that's going to create the same result. So you just got to play around with it. But by default, I tend to use content aware. So I'm going to come back here and lower my brush down to something smaller. And so like for something like this, if there was something really close, like here, this little dust mark here, I can use that to get rid of that. So what you don't want to do is this spot healing brush for areas where you're right up against the edge, because it just does not do a good job. That's not that bad. But you can get some really crazy stuff happening. You can see it if the brush is also too large. You can see how it kind of messes up that corner there. It really doesn't know what to do with this. So it's incorporating too many pixels. You always want the brush to be slightly larger than the area that you're correcting. So what I like also about this document is I can play around with retouching on it. I want to make sure that I do it on its own layer so that I can see the changes. And it's also just the best practice. This is how you work non-destructively. I'm not making any change to the image. When I'm using the spot healing brush, it's recording all of these changes to this layer right here. So I can turn it on and off. I can blend it back in if I need to. When you're doing this, make sure that you're not getting rid of the grain. Film grain should be there. That's sort of these little dots in the background. But this dust and whatnot, you should get rid of that. So the other thing I like about this document is that when you go to colorize, you can use this one side and you can use this to sample. So, and this is something I'm going to go over next week, this technique, but basically to colorize, you're going to create a layer and you're going to select a color. So let's say I want the background to be red, and I'll come back in here and I will just paint in, I'll select my brush and I'll just paint in a red color. And then I'll come back in here and I'll change this to color mode. And it changes, it allows me to colorize it. So another quick way of doing this is instead of just painting, you can use something like a quick selection tool and make a quick selection of the image, and then create an adjustment layer that's solid color, and pick the color that you want. Let's do a blue, and I'll click OK. And then from here, we got to change this to color mode. So it creates a blend. What I like about this method of using adjustment layers is that it's non-destructive, and I can go back in here and make a change. Inevitably, anytime I do any kind of colorization, I never like the initial color. You got to go back in and you got to tweak it because the color changes also depending on the color mode. If you play around with some of these color modes, you can see it has a dramatic effect on how the color is portrayed and how it blends the topmost layer or the selected layer with the background. You know, some of these color modes add contrast, some darken. As you're working through colorizing next week, something to keep in mind. Now, in the video, I only use color mode. However, there are times where it might look better if you use multiply. Maybe that's what you're going for. So try also playing around. Start with color, but play around with some of these other modes. And use an adjustment layer, because I can come back in here, I can double click, and this will allow me to dial in the exact color I want. And I can keep playing around with it until I find that color. So maybe I'm looking for something that's like slightly brown, but maybe with less saturation. So I'll hold down Command. When I do that and I hover over the saturation, it allows me to slide, use that as a slider and sort of dial in what I want. So that looks pretty good. It's certainly not as saturated as the original color, and that's what I was going for. So now if I, for your project, you're not going to have an ability to sample. You're not going to have a reference. In this document, you do have a reference here. But for yours, you're just going to have to kind of come up with the colors on your own, except for the skin tones. And the method that I'm using here to colorize is a little bit different when you're doing skin. And I'll explain in the video how you want to do the skin in order to make it look a little bit more natural. But for here, let's say we want to do the jacket. I'll create another adjustment layer. Oops. I'll create another adjustment layer here. We'll do a solid color adjustment layer. And I'll go ahead and click OK. And then I will change this to color mode. And I'll go ahead and try like a different color. And this time, you notice I didn't make a selection, so I would have to go back in here into the layer mask and paint that back in. So I have filled the layer mask with black that hides everything. And now I can come back in here and I'm painting that back in. So I'm painting white into the layer mask, which is revealing the layer itself. Okay. So any questions about that?
Yeah. Could I
Yeah.
also do a photo filter? If I clip it, if I cut it out, clip it, mask it, and do a photo filter?
Yeah, you could do photo filter. You could do a photo filter. Would you use the photo filter in color mode?
Yes, I think so. Well, I don't know. I'd have to play around with it, but like I would cut it out like you did on the brown layer. I would cut it out and then I would add a filter for it. So like I would cut out the jacket and add a color filter
Yeah.
or photo filter.
It's a little unconventional to do that, but you can do it. You know, just play around with it. Typically, everybody uses a color mode, and the reason being is the color mode also doesn't add additional. It doesn't change the contrast. So, for example, if here you notice that when I change this, go from color mode to something like hard light, it makes it more saturated and darker, and it just changes the look of it. Soft light. So some of these, especially these first few modes, do add some things in addition to the color, but color just adds changes to the color. So it doesn't add any changes to the luminosity. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So going back to this, if I want to try to match this color here, you'll notice that if I double click on this, it opens up the color picker, and the color picker, I can either change the color this way, or I can use these sliders. I can numerically put something in. So if I'm working with a client and they have a very specific RGB value, I'm trying to match a logo for instance, I can get that RGB value and plug it in here. But what I can also do when I hover off of the color picker, it becomes the eyedropper tool, and that allows me to take a sample of anything. So I'll take a sample of this jacket here, and look at that. It automatically brings over that exact color, and it is pretty close. It's going to be a little bit different because it is in a color mode. And when I worked on this image, this is the final image. So there were different things that I did to it on top of doing this color mode to add some variety. Because what doesn't look good is, you know, when you go in there and you paint and you just leave it like this, it doesn't look very realistic. What gives it a sense of realism is when you come back in here and maybe start painting just like little spots of different colors, just like little flecks of different shades of blue. Because, you know, in real life, you know, when we're talking about clothing and the way that the light falls on clothing, it's not a solid color all the way through. There's different shades. And so that's another reason why I recommend when you're working on the skin tones, especially, there's no area that it's more important than in the skin tones, is to use a gradient map. And I'll explain that in next week's video. But if you notice in this image, it's not just one skin color. So if I come here and I create another solid color, I'll click OK, and I'll go ahead and fill this with whatever, black. And I'm gonna take a sample of this skin tone here. And then I'll come over here and try to paint this I'll paint it onto the face, and I'll use the layer mask to do that. And I'm just going to paint the entire face, and then I'll switch it to color mode. And like, notice the difference here. So it's the same color, but it looks digital. It's flat. It's almost kind of monochromatic. And when I did the one on the right, I'm not using just one color. Skin is not just one color. I'm actually using probably 3 or 4 colors there, in addition to some like little finishing touches that, you know, the redness around the cheeks gives it some variety, makes it look a little bit more natural. I think I put some red around the ears. So a lot of this, you know, in order to get it to look authentic, you know, requires some additional steps besides just applying the color mode and using this method. It's helpful to observe something, maybe have a reference picture of anybody, any headshot, anything, and just be looking at those skin tones and looking at how the skin tones change. So maybe you come in here and this will be your base skin tone, but then maybe you can come up with another brighter skin tone or a darker skin tone and paint that into another area. So like, let's say I'll paint a lighter skin tone in here and then a darker skin tone in here. These things take time. And if you want good results, they do take a while. The one that I did, the one on the right here, I think was 2 hours. There's a lot of detail in there. So I hope this helps. You guys have any additional questions regarding my main purpose tonight in terms of these demonstrations was to show you the difference between the tools, the 3 or 4 retouching tools. The patch tool is another retouching tool, but that's not, for this particular project, I don't think it's going to be very valuable. So you guys have any additional thoughts or concerns, fears?
No, I don't have any.
No? Okay. All righty. Well, that's all I got for you guys for tonight. We'll be doing, again, another Zoom session next week and probably go over some, it's going to be mostly question and answer. I've got a very small lecture, but I think that rather than me demonstrate that color technique, because it really takes a while and there's a lot of steps to it, I thought the better option would be to just do a video that you guys can watch again and again. It is a little fast paced, but you can start and stop the video and repeat. And I think it's going to be a lot more helpful than a live demonstration. So, all righty. Well, you guys have a good week. And if you need me, just let me know. I am here for you guys.
I know it's late, but I added my comment to the discussion.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind taking a look at what I've done so far.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are you talking about for module 3 Slack discussion?
No. Did I? Yeah, I posted it in the Slack as well.
Okay.
No. My actual photo that I'm using to retouch.
Okay.
I posted it in the discussion board.
Okay. I will. I'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Well, you guys have a good night, and if you need me, let me know. All right.
Have a good one. Thank you.
All right.
Have a
you're
good
welcome.
one.
See you later.